Welcome to our town hall with Joe Biden. Mr. Vice President, welcome to you.
Good to be with you.
We're here with a group of Pennsylvania voters. You can see they're all appropriately socially distanced tonight.
Yeah.
And they're a group of, some are voting for you. Some have said they're
It
voting
is a funny sight,
for President
though.
Trump. Some are still undecided. And we're going to try to take questions from as many of them as we can tonight. And we're going to start with Nicholas Fedden. He's from Jenkintown, Pennsylvania. That's close to here in Philadelphia.
Perfect.
And
Let's get right in the trenches, everybody.
you're a Democrat.
I am a Democrat. Thank you, George. Mr. Vice President, every day my wife and I are in disbelief at the lack of coordinated federal action on COVID-19. We know that your administration would follow the science. My question for you is two parts. First, looking backwards to when this country first became aware of
Riding with Biden, baby.
COVID-19, what would following the science have meant in terms of actual policy? And then, looking forward,
Good question.
what would your administration do in terms of following the science with real concrete policies that haven't been done by the current administration?
Well, first of all, going back, the fact is that the president was informed how dangerous this virus was. And all the way back in the beginning of February, I argued that we should be keeping people in China. And we had set up in our administration a pandemic office within the White House. There were 44 people on the ground. I suggested we should be seeking, and I didn't hold public office. I was a former vice president.
Doing
I
A-OK
suggested,
over here.
In fact, asked to have access to the source of the problem. And to the best of our knowledge, Trump never pushed that. All those 44 people came home, never got replaced. In addition to that, I pointed out that I thought in February, I did a piece for USA Today saying this is a serious problem. Trump denied it. He said it wasn't. We later learned that he knew full well how serious it was when he did an interview with Bob Woodward. And at the time, he said he didn't tell anybody because he was afraid Americans would panic. Americans don't panic. He panicked. He didn't say a word to anybody. Then I wrote a piece in March about what I thought we should be doing to take hold of this, using there's an act that's passed a long time ago that allows the president to go into a business and say, stop making this and start making that.
Yeah, the Wartime Powers Act.
It took a long time for him to even institute that, to get ventilators and so on. And so the point was he missed enormous opportunities and kept saying things that weren't true. It's going to go away by Easter. Don't worry about it. It's going to all, when the summer comes, it's all going to go away like a miracle.
After this, we're going to get to Trump's town hall, okay?
Looking backward just a little bit, you did have an op-ed in January where you warned to the seriousness of the pandemic, but there's no record of you calling for social distancing, limited social gatherings, mandatory masks.
Not back then.
In January, February.
No, in January, February. No, that's correct. There wasn't. That came at the end of March, and then I laid out a detailed plan relative to school openings in June and July. And I talked about, by that time, the science was becoming clearer and clearer of how this was spreading so rapidly. But the president kept denying that. If you notice, from March on, I stopped doing big meetings. I started wearing masks. So it was at a time when the science was saying, and his key people, Dr. Fauci, were saying, you should be taking these precautions. So what we should be doing
by the
now,
way, we could have
should
taken
be a
precautions
national
while bringing people
standard.
back
Instead of
from China.
Remember
We
what
just
the president
didn't.
said to the governors, well, they're on their own. It's not my responsibility. The governors can do what they need to do, not my responsibility. It is a presidential responsibility to lead. And he didn't do that. He didn't talk about what needed to be done because he kept worrying, in my view, about the stock market. He worried if he talked about how bad this could be unless we took these precautionary actions, then, in fact, the market would go down. And his barometer of success in the economy is the market.
Exactly.
Thirdly,
He's actually 100% correct.
Had an opportunity to open and allow schools and businesses to stay open if they got the kind of help they needed. So the Congress passed a couple $1 trillion worth of help, and what happened was most of that money, significant portion of that money, went to the very wealthiest corporations in the country, didn't get to the mom and pop stores. So you had 1 in 5, 1 in 6 minority businesses closing, many of them permanently, people being laid off. And then what happened was when the first tranche of the first round of money for unemployment, enhanced unemployment, went by, he didn't do anything. He didn't do anything.
True.
And to the best of my knowledge, and I mean this sincerely, I can't think, I've been around for a lot of presidents, and you know a lot of presidents in a crisis. I don't ever remember one never calling the House and Senate, Republicans and Democrats together.
Let's look forward a little bit. You said that you would lock down the economy only if the scientists said it was necessary.
Well, by the way, that wasn't the context. They said, would I lock down the economy if science said so? I said I'd follow science. But I don't think there's a need to lock down.
But I want to press you on that point.
Sure.
You've been in the Oval Office for 8 years with President Obama. He would always say that only the hard to solve problems get to his desk. What is most likely to happen is the scientists will disagree. The scientists will disagree with the economists. So the question is, how are you going to decide this? Who are you going to listen to? And how can you contain the pandemic without crushing the economy?
Well,
George,
you can
with the
contain
good
the pandemic
questions.
by being rational and not trust the economy. For example, I laid out a plan how you can open businesses. You can open businesses and schools if, in fact, you provide them the guidance that they need as well as the money to be able to do it. What's happening now is we know, for example, if you can open a business and you could have a sign on the door saying safe to come in, that's why people aren't going anyway even when they're open, and say because you have social distancing, you have plastic barriers.
Well, and also if he had been able to implement his plan at the beginning of his
you don't have large crowds, you reduce the size of the number of people you can have in the restaurant.
You avoid the
sure
entire
testing.
effects of the pandemic
piece
because
you
you
didn't
keep
do.
it
Testing and
controlled at the
tracing,
beginning.
and you make sure that people are equipped.
At this point,
going to
we're
schools.
in a situation where it's
we
going to
initially
affect the
said-
economy
the
no matter what we
said they were
do.
going to provide masks for every student.
So we need to do
and
the
every
most
teacher.
effective thing.
Then they said, no. FEMA said that the president or whomever said, no, that's not a national emergency. Not a national emergency. We need more teachers in our schools to be able to open smaller pods. We need ventilation systems changed. Well, there's a lot of things we know now. And I laid them out in some detail. Now, again, when I say I laid them out, I'm not an office holder. I'm running for office. It's not like I'm still vice president or I was a United States senator pushing this. So I don't want to say I. But we did lay out exactly what needed to be done. And take a look. We make up 4% of the world's population. We have 20% of the world's deaths. We're in a situation where we have 210,000+ people dead. And what's he doing? Nothing. He's still not wearing masks and so on.
We're getting some more questions on COVID.
Sure.
The next one comes from Kelly Lee. She's from Philadelphia.
Thank you.
Republican.
The funny thing
Trump
is,
in
people
2016,
go
undecided
so
now.
much harder on Biden than they
Kelly,
do
how are
on
you?
Trump.
Hi, Mr.
Trump just
Biden.
says a bunch of bullshit.
My
and they're like,
question is about
okay,
the
moving
coronavirus
on.
vaccine,
Yes.
or potential. Senator Harris stated that she absolutely would not take a vaccine from President Trump. And of course, we all know it's not President Trump that would create this vaccine. It would be doctors and scientists that presumably we all trust. So my question for you is, if a vaccine were approved between now and the end of the year, would you take it? And if you were to become president, would you mandate that everyone has to take it?
Two things. Number one, President Trump talks about things that just aren't accurate about everything from vaccines. We're going to have one right away. It's going to happen and so on. The point is that if the body of scientists say that this is what is ready to be done and it's been tested, it's gone through the 3 phases, yes, I would take it. I'd encourage people to take it. But President Trump says things like, everything from this crazy stuff he's walking away from now, inject bleach in your arm and that's going to work. I'm not being facetious though. I mean, he's actually said these things. And now Regeneron is the answer. That's going to cure everything. There's 500,000 doses. We got a couple, we have more than a few million people. And most of if you notice, most of the companies who are developing these vaccines are working, they're making real progress. I meet with 4 leading scientists at least
they are
twice a
making
week
progress.
in the beginning,
The
4
issue
times a
is
week,
that
giving us
Trump
the detail
wants
on
to
what
cut
kind of
a lot
progress
of
is being
corners to
made.
get this out as
And
fast as
right
possible,
now, they do the right
which is what
thing. When
makes
they
it
run
less
into a
safe.
serious problem, they halt the test. They don't continue until they figure out what the problem was. They're not there yet. And the most scientists say it's not likely to have a vaccine that would be available until the beginning of next year, into the spring of next year. And in the meantime, what I worry about,
which, by
is
the way, is like the fastest we've ever developed a vaccine ever.
Not antidote, a useful tool. But what's happening is there was no plan to figure out how to distribute it. How many, we have 500,000, vials of it. Well, we don't have all the testing equipment. We don't have all the ability to get it to the people who need it. And what we should be doing now, and allegedly it's happening, but I've not seen it yet, nor the docs that I've talked to seen it, there should be a plan when we have the vaccine, how do we distribute it?
And once we get it, if it's safe, if it's effective, will you mandate its use?
The answer is depending on how clear. There's vaccines, they say, have a very positive impact, and they're going to affect positively 85% of the American public. Or there's others say this vaccine is really the key. This is the golden key. It depends on the state of
we'll get to the
Trump
town hall after we finish the Biden
and how
one.
it's being distributed. That would depend on. But I would think that we should be talking about, depending on the continuation of the spread of the virus, we should be thinking about making it mandatory.
How could you enforce that?
Well, you couldn't. That's the problem. Just like you can't enforce measles. You can't
town
come to
hall?
school unless you have a measles shot. You can't. But you can't say everyone has to do this. But you would, just like you can't mandate a mask. But you can say, you can go to every governor and get them all in a room, all 50 of them as president, and say, ask people to wear the mask. Everybody knows.
And if they don't, fines?
And they don't, no, not fine. Then I go to every governor, I go to every mayor, I go to every councilman, I go to every local official, say, mandate the mask. Say, this is what you have to do when you're out. Make sure you encourage it being done. Look, George, you and I know, and I think you do too as well, the words of a president matter.
Absolutely.
No matter whether they're good, bad, or indifferent, they matter. And when a president doesn't wear a mask or makes fun of folks like me when I was wearing a mask for a long time,
I do kind of wish he had just said, fucking wear the mask, Jack. Come on.
But when a president says,
Come on.
I think this is very important.
Old shoe leather's telling you to wear the mask.
With this mask, but
See,
I have
wear
the
it.
M95 mask underneath
It'll
it.
save lives. See,
in my dressing room, the room I was in before I got here, and so I
but
think
he can't
it matters
outright
what
say
we
that
say.
because they're
And
trying to
we're now
appeal
learning
to moderate,
that children
like conservatives,
are getting the virus, not with as serious consequences.
who chafe at the idea of the government telling them to do something like wear a mask.
So there's a long way to go, but we can make progress in the meantime and save lives. And the last point I'll make, if you listen to the head of the CDC, he stood up and he said, while we're waiting for a vaccine, and he held up a mask. You wear this mask, you'll save more lives between now and the end of the year than if we had a vaccine. It's estimated by every major study done from the University of Washington to Columbia that if in fact we wore masks, we could save between now and the end of the year 100,000 lives.
And avoid
No,
lockdowns.
guys, no. It's a massive Chinese
You don't have to lock down if you're
conspiracy.
wearing
The
the
masks are
Let's get a
part of
question on the
China's
economy.
plan.
Anthony Argyrakis.
Thank you. I hope I answered your question.
From Cannonsburg, Pennsylvania, it's a suburb of Pittsburgh.
People actually think that, by
Republican
the way.
for President Trump.
They think that
Thank
the
you,
masks
George.
are a
Thank you,
Chinese
Mr. Vice
conspiracy.
President. You stated that anyone making less than $400,000 will not see one single penny of their taxes raised.
That's right.
But also state that you are going to eliminate the Trump tax cuts. The Trump tax cuts reduces taxes for the majority of workers. I would argue
False.
not enough. What is your plan for either extending the tax cuts for the middle class or creating a new plan that further reduces those taxes?
I carry this card with me. When I said the Trump tax cuts, about $1.3 trillion of the $2 trillion in his tax cuts went to the top 1/10 of 1%. That's what I'm talking about eliminating, not all the tax cuts that are out there. And by the way, if you just take a look, we reduced the corporate tax rate from 35%, and Democrats and Republicans, when we were in office, thought it should come down to 28%. He reduced it to 21%. You have 91 out of the Fortune 500 companies not paying a single solitary penny. If you raise the corporate tax just back to 28%, which is a fair tax, you'd raise $1.3 trillion by that one act. If you made
$1.3
sure
trillion.
that people making over 400 grand paid what they did in the Bush administration, 39.6%, you would raise another, it goes up to, let me get you the exact number here, about another $92 billion. So you can raise a lot of money to be able to invest in things that can make your life easier, make you change your standard of living by making sure you have affordable health care, by making sure you're in a situation where you're able to send your kid to school, and if you have a student debt, you can deal with it, making sure that you're
honestly, the corporate tax rate should be up to 70%. That's what we had. By the way, we had a corporate tax rate of 70%
Is it wise to do
during the
even
most
that when the economy is
prosperous
as weak as it
time in
is right
American
now?
history,
Another
okay?
900,000 people.
We should do it again.
Great question. Moody's did analysis of my detailed analysis of my tax plan and my economic plan. They said, I will in 4 years, Moody's, Wall Street, said I will create 18.6 million new jobs, good paying jobs, number one. Number two, and I'll increase, the GDP will grow by $1 trillion more than it would under Trump, and 7 million more jobs than under Trump. And the reason is when you allow people to get back in the game and have a job, everything moves. Everything moves. Right now, you got the opposite.
This is actually similar to the argument I was making yesterday about providing homes to the homeless.
Billionaires in the world, in the nation, they made another $700 billion. $700 billion. He talks about a V-shaped recovery. It's a K-shaped recovery. If you're on the top, you're going to do very well.
This guy looks real sad.
And if you're in the bottom, or you're in the middle or the bottom, your income is coming down. You're not getting a raise. I don't know what you do. You may get a raise. Hope you're a billionaire. But all kidding aside, but it's about growing the economy. And George, the way out, the reason why I'm so optimistic about economic recovery, more than I've ever been, is we have these 4 crises happening all at once, and one helps the other. For example, we're going to invest a great deal of that money into infrastructure. And into a green infrastructure. We're going to put 500,000 charging stations on new highways we're building and old highways we're building. We're going to own the electric market. You know as well as I do from your days, in the old days, where the president spends about $600 billion a year on government contracts. Everything from making sure they have aircraft carriers to automobile fleets for in the United States. If you and it's not violation of any international trade agreement, made in America. If you actually insist that, whatever that product is, made in America, including the material that goes into the product, it's estimated we're going to create somewhere between another 4 and 6 million jobs just by doing that. But what's happening now? Under his trade policy, a lot of this is going overseas. You get a benefit from going overseas if you have much of it being made overseas. So if you send it overseas, you get a 10% tax increase on the product. If you make it in America and you bring it back, you get a 10% growth. If you bring back a company and you're going to open up an old facility, you get a 10% tax credit for all you invested. That actually works, George.
So there's not going to be any delay on the tax increases?
No, well, I got to get the votes.
Yeah.
I got to get the votes. That's why.
Depends on if we win the Senate.
The one thing that I have this strange notion, we are a democracy. Some of my Republican friends and some of my Democratic
agree that these
friends
questions
say,
on this
well, if you can't get the votes by executive order, you're going to do something.
But
things you can't do by executive order unless
the
you're
coronavirus
follow-ups
were pretty
we need
pretty good.
consensus.
Got to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
I hope I answered your question.
We the people of the United States.
I just have to say,
in order to form a more perfect
he's doing very well in these public events that we've been watching together. Like, I know a lot of people talk about how Biden is like going. He's senile. He's mentally unfit or whatever. But he just gave a pretty detailed breakdown of his taxation policy and what he would want to do, and that can be hard to articulate. So props where props are due. Obviously, a younger person might be able to articulate it a bit better, but you know what? He did pretty good for a ancient politician.
Humphrey is a student from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, progressive Democrat.
No. We're going to go to Trump after Biden.
Okay. Thank you, George. And good evening, former Vice President Biden. Many people believe that the true swing demographic in this election will be black voters under the age of 30. Not because they'll be voting for Trump, but because they won't vote at all. I myself have had this exact same conflict. So my question for you then is, besides you ain't black, what do you have to say to young black voters who see voting for you as further participation in a system that continually fails to protect them?
Well, I say, first of all, as my buddy John Lewis said, it's a sacred opportunity and right to vote. You can make a difference. If young black women and men vote, you can determine the outcome of this election. Not a joke. You can do that. And the next question is, am I worthy of your vote? Can I earn your vote? And the answer is, there's two things I think that I care, and I've demonstrated I care about my whole career. One is, in addition to dealing with a criminal justice system to make it fair and make it more decent, we have to be able to put black Americans in a position to be able to gain wealth, generate wealth. And so you look at what that entails. It entails everything from early education. That's why I'm supporting making sure that we in Title I schools, as you know, schools with the least tax base to be able to support their schools. I increased the funding for them from $15 to $45 billion. That allows every teacher in that school to make up to $60,000. And the problem now is they're leaving the schools. They're not there. We're short about 1.5 million teachers, 1.25 million teachers. Number two, every 3-, 4-, and 5-year-old will go to school, not daycare, school. And what all the great universities, including the one you've gone to, or went to, in fact, talks about in the last 8 years, what's happened. What happens when you let them go to school, they make up rapidly whatever shortcoming they had in terms of their education prior to that. They have not heard as many words spoken, et cetera, et cetera. What happens is that the studies show that 58% will increase by 58% their chance of going all through 12 years of school and going through successfully. We'll also provide for the ability.
Well, boss, actually,
we
went over Biden's plans for the black community.
School psychologists in America now,
and
they're
pretty detailed. So
kids, it should be 1 to 500, not just in
all of this is in his
schools
plan
that are poor, but in all schools, because we learned that, for example, drug abuse doesn't cause mental illness. Mental illness causes drug abuse. The failure to get hold of people and deal with their anxieties.
No, he wasn't explicitly lying. He said he tried to make the criminal justice system fair, which is not the same thing as making fair to black people,
They don't have the kind of foundational support they need. And so that would allow them, for example, like we did in our administration, the president allowed me to go down and we awarded a cybersecurity laboratory, ability to compete for a cybersecurity laboratory. The federal government spends billions of dollars a year on universities because they're the best kept secret, or where most of the major inventions come out of. And so that school now will be able to produce young black women and men who are going to go into a field of the future that's burgeoning, cybersecurity. And that's what's going to help a better,
succinct way of summing up what he's going to do for the black community.
You graduated from school and you want to own your first home, or it's awful hard to get the money, and depending on the background, what your economic background is, to get a down payment. So we're going to guarantee first-term home buyers a $15,000 down payment for first-term home buyers.
Every wall will fall.
In addition to that, what all the studies now show, and I've been arguing this for a long time, is young black entrepreneurs are just as successful as white entrepreneurs or anyone else given a shot. But you can't get the money. Where do you go to get the startup money? So what President Obama and I did, we had a program where we took $1.5 billion and we invested it in all the SBAs around the country, in the state SBAs, small business associations, and that generated $30 billion came off the sideline. Because if you have a guarantee of $200,000 for your new startup enterprise, young entrepreneur, you're going to be able to attract, if it's government money as a guarantee, you'll be able to attract another $100,000. It generated $30 billion. Well, I'm changing that program, and I'll get this done without much trouble, I believe, in the Congress, from $1.5 million to $30 billion to $30 billion. That'll take $300 billion off the sideline and grow, because you know. And for example, if you, in fact, and I were the same age, and we split our differences, and we were the same age, and we went to the same builder to buy us each the same home. But my home was in a white neighborhood on one side of a highway, and yours is in a black neighborhood. Same exact home. Your home will start off being valued 29% less than my home. Yet your insurance for that home will be higher. You'll be taxed more for it. We've got to end this. That's what got me involved in politics in the first place, a thing called redlining. We can change so much, that we can do so much to change the circumstances to give people a real opportunity.
Cedric, did you hear what you needed?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just saying, do you hear what you needed to hear?
I think so.
Okay. Well, there's a lot more if you want to, if you're going to hang around afterwards. I'll tell you more.
Okay.
Let's get
No, but I really mean it. It is the key. Look, this is the way every other, how do most, like my dad, he lost his job up in Scranton. And it took him 3 years to be able, he moved down to Delaware, to Claymont, Delaware, a little steel town, and sent us home to our grandpop to live with him. We finally got back. We lived in apartments, became 6 and 8 housing. Much later it wasn't. It was just normal apartments. But it took him 5 years to be able to buy a home.
Yeah, like this.
Well, we bought a 3-bedroom home
question,
with 4
race
kids
in
and a
America,
grandpop
is
living with
not
us.
Biden's
But it
strong suit.
accumulated wealth. You build up
It's
wealth.
just
That's
not.
how middle-class folks make it. They
The only
build
way
up wealth,
Biden
and he was
looks
able to
good
borrow
on this
a little
question
against that to be able to help us get to
is
school, those kinds
leaning
of things. It's about
into
accumulating
the
wealth.
policies that he wants
it's
to pass
you're
should he
behind
get
an
into
8 ball.
office,
The vast
and
majority
really
of people
leaning
of color are
into
behind
how
an 8
much
ball.
worse
And
Trump
it's the same way
looks
what's going on now
when
with all this
you
money
compare
that's
their
been
two
voted.
histories.
What's happened? You go to the bank if you're a black businessman, and the president fired the only inspector general to oversee all this help coming from the Congress. And what happens? You go in and they say, do you have an account here? No. Do you have a credit card with this? No. Have you borrowed from us before? No. We bail these suckers out. They're not liable for any of the money, but they still won't rent it. They still won't lend it to you. We got to change that. It's about accumulating wealth.
Want to get another question in here from Angelica Politaros? No, not at all. Garnet Valley, Pennsylvania, Republican who voted for President Trump last time.
Thank you, George. Thank you, Vice President Biden. Nice to meet you. What's your view on the crime bill that you wrote in 1994, which showed prejudice against minorities? Where do you stand today on that?
Well, first of all, things have changed drastically. That crime bill, when it voted, the Black Caucus voted for it. Every black mayor supported it across the board. And it didn't. The crime bill itself did not have mandatory sentences except for 2 things. It had 3 strikes and you're out, which I voted against in the crime bill. But it had a lot of other things in it that turned out to be both bad and good. I wrote the Violence Against Women Act. That was part of it. The assault weapons ban and other things that were good. What I was against was giving states more money for prison systems that they could build, state prison systems. And you have 93 out of every 100 people in jail now is in a state prison, not in a federal prison, because they built more prisons. I also wrote into that bill a thing called drug courts. I don't believe anybody should be going to jail for drug use. They should be going into mandatory rehabilitation. We should be building rehab centers to have these people housed. We should wipe out, we should decriminalize marijuana.
I don't know about that one.
Wipe out the record
I like that
so
one,
you can
though.
actually say in honesty, you ever been arrested for anything? You can say no, because we're going to pass a law saying there is no background that you have to reveal relative to the use of marijuana. And so there's a lot of things, but in addition to that, we got to change the system. I joined with a group
I thought
of
he was going to
people
do
in
poorly
the
on this
House
question, but he's
to
actually
provide
doing
for
pretty well.
changing the system from punishment to rehabilitation. Along with a guy named Arlen Specter, who you may remember, I wrote the Second Chance Act.
But in the meantime, an awful lot of people were jailed for minor drug crimes after the
Exactly
crime.
right.
Was it a mistake to support it?
Yes, it was. But here's where the mistake came. The mistake came in terms of what the states did locally. What we did federally, we said it was, and you remember, George, it was all about the same time for the same crime. What I had done as chairman of the Judiciary Committee, took the 10 circuit courts of appeals, took some really brilliant lawyers working for me in judiciary. We did a study. And we determined what happens if, for the first, second, third offense, for any crime in the criminal justice system, at the federal level, if you're a black man, it's the first time you committed robbery. How long would you go to jail on average? If you're a white man, how long? Black man would go to jail on average 13 years. White man, 2 years. I go down the list of every single crime. So we set up a sentencing commission. We didn't set the time. Every single solitary maximum was reduced in there. But what happened was it became the same time for the same crime. So it said you have to serve between 1 and 3 years. It ended up becoming much lower. Black folks went to jail a lot less than they would have before, but it was a mistake.
Let me ask another follow-up on the crime bill. It also funded 100,000 police back in 1994. You've often said that more cops clearly mean less
these are some
crime.
hard questions.
Do you still believe that?
Yes, if in fact they're involved in community policing, not jump squads. For example, when we had community policing,
he is incorrect.
From the mid-90s on
community policing is good, but you don't want to keep adding in more
Bush got elected.
police on top.
What happened? Violent crime actually went down precipitously. Remember the significant rise in violent crime that was occurring in the late 80s into the 90s. It went down, and fewer African Americans were arrested.
Like the crime bill
was
was,
the requirement. The
like
cops
he's
didn't
saying,
like
good
it.
in
They
some
didn't
ways,
like
bad in
community
others.
policing.
And it's
Because you had
complicated when you
two
get
people
into
in
the
a
weeds
vehicle,
about
They
it.
had to get out of their cars.
But stuff
they
like
had
the
to introduce
Violence
themselves
Against
to
Women
who
Act
owned
was
the local,
definitely good.
Liquor store, who owned the local grocery store, who was the woman on the corner.
Which is,
And what
by
they
the
would
way,
do,
incidentally,
George,
why
they'd
even
actually
Bernie
go and
Sanders
give
voted for the
people
bill.
their phone numbers. A cop would give the phone number. So if Nellie Smith was on the second floor where drug deals took place and things happened below her, her apartment, she could call and say, it's Millie, and there's something going on here, and they'd never reveal it was her, because they know if she knew that, in fact, they'd never report the crime.
It did have
She
some
would never
extremely
report.
bad effects,
So it actually started to come down. What happened? They
definitely
eliminated the
did.
funding for community policing. Community policing doesn't mean more people coming in up-armored Humvees and swarming like that. When they did, it turned out that by the time we got to the late 90s, the crime had come down so much, and the mayors and everybody asked the question, where do you want me to spend the money? They say, well, only 1% thought violent crime was a problem. It was as high as 22%.
Right now we have a systemic problem. How do you get the kind of policing, prevent the kind of policing?
You have to change the way in which they police. One of the things I'm going to do, George, is what is
Biden
set
needs
up
to
a
announce the
national
creation of police
study group
too.
made up of cops, social workers, as well as made up of
Police
the
too.
black community and the brown community, to sit down in the White House and over the next
I get what you
year,
mean,
come
boss.
up with
I think
significant
he
reforms that
came
need
off
to take
looking
place
worse in the
within
previous
communities.
question, though.
You have to
This
bring
question,
them
he's
together.
actually
one of the things I've
coming off
observed
pretty
is,
okay.
you know, the neighbor I grew up in Claymont. You either became a cop, a firefighter, or a priest. I wasn't qualified much to do any one of them. But here's the deal, all kidding aside. Most cops don't like bad cops.
Correct.
They don't like it.
Correct.
And so what happens is they get intimidated into not reporting. So
Part
one
of the
things
issue
we do
is,
there has
like,
to be
with him
transparency
saying, like,
available.
we'll establish
we have to be
a,
able to go in at the federal level, be able to go in and
commission to study all of this. Is that we've had commissions to study police before. It's just that
if in fact
the findings of those commissions have not been followed because it calls for like less cops and more social workers, and people want more cops.
To get another prosecutor to come in and handle the crime. There's a lot of
Despite the
things
fact
we've
that
learned.
more cops are not
And it
effective
takes
at
time, but we
combating
can
these
do
problems.
this. You can ban chokeholds. You can, but beyond that, you have to teach people how to de-escalate circumstances. De-escalate.
Like,
So
by the way,
instead
you can
of
still
anybody coming at you, the first
you
thing
can
do is
ban
shoot to kill.
chokeholds all
You
you
shoot them in the
want,
leg.
but
There's ways you
cops
have
will
to
still
do more
use them
background
during
checks in
arrests.
terms
We've
of
seen
whether or
that.
not the person coming in passes certain psychological test. And the last thing I'll say,
Yes,
and I'm sorry, because
every
it's
wall will
really,
fall. True,
I think
police
really,
too.
really important.
Only
you have
big
to be in a
booties.
position where you
Men
are
and women.
able to
Only big booties in
identify-
police too.
Identify the things that have to change, and one of the things that has to change is so many cops get called into circumstances where somebody is mentally off.
True.
Like what happened
That's why
long
we
ago,
need to
that
call
guy
in
with the knife.
police too. In those
That's why we have to
situations.
provide within police departments psychologists and social workers to go out with the cops on those
See?
calls, some of those 911 calls, to de-escalate the circumstance.
No.
to
We
deal
need
with
police
talking
too.
Down. But we
Biden's
can't-
almost
cops
there,
are
guys.
kinda
He's
like
almost
school
talking
teachers
about
now.
police too. I'm
You
very
know, school
excited,
teachers ask them
actually.
Everything from how to handle hunger in a household, as well as how to teach you how to read. Well, cops don't have that breadth. And there's a lot of things we can do. We shouldn't be defunding cops. We should be mandating the things that we should be doing within police departments and make sure there's total transparency.
Got to take another quick break. We'll be right back.
True, boss. Corruption in police unions is actually a huge problem. Like, I live around I live around Minneapolis, and so I can tell you the head of our police, like the Minneapolis Police Union, is like an avowed white supremacist. But like, there's nothing anyone can do about it because he's the head of the union, and like all of the police officers support their fellow officers. So, you know, he's been the head of the union for years, and it's like public knowledge that he is a white supremacist. So it's like, yeah, not a lot anyone can do about that. And as much as I am a leftist and I am pro-unionization in an era where we don't have worker co-ops, I think that there's a good argument to be made that specifically when it comes to police, we should disempower police unions because they have the ability to completely negate like the ability to rein in police officers. Like, you can't even fire a murderer in the police.
Commissioner Nathan Osborne of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Democrat.
Hi, George, Mr. Vice President.
Hey, Nathan.
Our country's first Supreme Court gave its first rulings just 2 blocks from here, from 1791 to 1800, and it's become more polarized since then. Merrick Garland didn't get a hearing for all of 2016, and Amy Coney Barrett's being pushed through at the last minute, even though millions have already voted. So what do you think about ideas from people like Pete Buttigieg and others to put in place safeguards that will help ensure more long-term balance and stability? And what do you say to LGBTQ Americans and others who are very worried right now about erosions of their rights and our democracy as a whole?
Well, let me start the last point, work my way back. I think there's great reason to be concerned. I was on the road most of the time during these hearings, so I didn't hear many of them. I just got the recaps when I'd get in late at night.
We just talked about this yesterday.
I've been going around the country, Florida, and anyway. And but my reading online, what the judge said was she didn't answer very many questions at all. And I don't even think she has laid out much of a judicial philosophy in terms of the basis upon which she thinks are there unenumerated rights in the Constitution and the rest. So, number one. So I think there's great reason to be concerned for the LGBT community, something I've fought very hard for a long time to make sure there's equality across the board. Number two, I think that also healthcare overall is very much in jeopardy as a consequence of the president's going to go directly after this election directly to the Supreme Court within a month to try to get Obamacare wiped out after 10 million people have already lost their insurance from their employer and wants to take 20 million people out of the system as well, plus 100 million people with pre-existing conditions. So there's a lot at stake. I don't think it's appropriate. I think the Constitution implies. There's no provision in the Constitution. My problem is I made a mistake of teaching constitutional law for 21 years and the separation of powers. The Constitution implies that the way the people have a right to determine who's going to be on the court is how they vote for their senators and their presidents. We seek the advice and consent of the Senate and the
president's president for all 4 years, isn't he?
No, he is. But once an election begins, by implication, it is inconsistent with the constitutional principles, in my view. You get disagreement among scholars on this. But I believe it's inconsistent when millions of people already voted to put someone on the court. I think it should have been held until this election is over, see what the makeup of the Senate is going to be. If the president wins this election, he should be able to.
How about that question of expanding the court? Here's what you said exactly 1 year ago tonight at a Democratic debate. You said, I would not get into court packing. I would not pack the court. That's not what you're saying now. Is the nomination of Judge Barrett reason enough to rethink your position?
What is the nomination of what I wanted to do, George? You know, if I had answered the question directly, then all the focus would be on what's Biden going to do if he wins, instead of on is it appropriate what is going on now. And it should stay, this is the thing that the president loves to do, always take our eye off the ball. What's at stake? One of the things Pete has suggested is, and there's a number of constitutional scholars have suggested as well, that there are at least 4 or 5 options that are available to determine whether or not you can
He is
change
dodging
the way
this
in which
question,
the court
but it's a
lifetime
good
appointment takes
dodge.
place, consistent, arguably, with the Constitution. I have not been a fan of court packing because I think it just generates what will happen. Whoever wins, it just keeps moving in a way that is inconsistent with what is going to be manageable.
So you're still not a fan?
Well, I'm not a fan. I then say it depends on how this turns out. Not how he wins, but how it's handled. How it's handled. But there's a number of things that are going to be coming up, and there's going to be a lot of discussion about other alternatives as well.
What does that mean, how it's handled? How will that determine
well, for example, there's actually real live debate on the floor. If people are really going to be able to have a time to go through this, I don't know anybody who's gone on the floor and that's been a controversial justice in terms of fundamentally altering the makeup of the court that's gone through in a day kind of thing. I mean, it depends on how much they rush this. And you think about it, George. Here you got a lot of people not being able to pay their mortgage, not being able to put food on the table, not being able to keep their business open, not being able to do anything to deal with what's going on in terms of the economy as a consequence of COVID. And they have no time to deal with that, but they have time to rush this through.
Well, right now, it looks like they're going to have a vote around Halloween. So if they vote on it before the election, you are open to expanding the court?
I'm open to considering what happens from that point on.
You said so many times during the
this is a really good deflection, a really good non-committal answer.
If I say, no matter what answer I gave you, if I say it, that's the headline tomorrow. It won't be about what's going on now, the improper way they're proceeding.
But don't voters have a right to know where you stand?
They do have a right to know where they stand, and they'll have a right to know where I stand before they vote.
So you'll come out with a clear position before Election Day?
Yes, depending on how they handle this. But look, what you should do is you got to make sure you vote.
Putting a spotlight on the process of the Amy Coney Barrett hearings is actually a pretty savvy move.
Interpretation. And vote for a president who thinks
every wall will fall.
There
aren't links in chat. But I can confirm for you, Youth, that yes,
my position, vote for Trump.
The United States does have concentration camps for asylum seekers and illegal immigrants. The ICE detention camps.
Presidents come and go.
They're privatized by private companies for profit, and they hold on to these people for months or years. They can hold on to them indefinitely. We'll talk about it on the stream sometime.
You're going to vote against President Trump this year?
And John's writing in for me, by the way.
I know that. Mr. Vice President.
I'm sorry.
Oh, true. You can also whisper to each other.
Served as Secretary of Transportation under President Ronald Reagan in his first term.
Oh, yeah. I'll be darned.
And some of his closest allies and friends were Democrats, including House Speaker Tip O'Neill and Senator Ted Kennedy. Sadly, today we have highly partisan and dysfunctional governance, and I believe President Trump is primarily responsible for creating this toxic environment. As president, how will you avoid the temptation to exact revenge and instead take the high road and attempt to restore bipartisanship, civility, and honor to our democracy?
As written by a fellow who won the Pulitzer Prize for a book he wrote about the presidency, he said, I doubt whether Biden is really Irish. He doesn't hold a grudge. In politics, grudges don't work. They make no sense. I really mean it. I have never, and the second point I'd make is, everybody talks about, yeah, Joe, when you were a senator and a chairman of foreign relations or chairman of judiciary, you got a lot of things done. You're able to cross the aisle, but the days are changed. When you're vice president, you got a lot done, but it can't happen anymore. It can. We got to change the nature of the way we deal with one another. And it starts off by the way your father was and Tip was and others. You don't question another man or woman's motive. You can question their judgment, but not their motive. We badly need an infrastructure bill. Well, what happens? I stand up and I say, we need an infrastructure bill, Senator, but I tell you what, you're in the pocket of the cement industry. But let's see what we can do. You can't get anywhere. Nothing happens.
Okay.
Nothing happens. I learned that lesson a long time ago. I've never, when it's obvious
the point he's making is
true. What the motive is.
But you need to be able to know what their motive is, and you need to have people who work for you who are able to articulate their motives.
And you can ask if they tell you your dad's old friends on the Republican side.
The general public can understand what's happening in politics.
We got to figure out how we're going to move forward here, because there's so many things we really do agree on.
Part of what Joe Biden is saying right now
The vindictiveness of a president going after Republicans who don't do exactly what he says gets taken away. There's going to be, I promise you, between 4 and 8 Republican senators are going to be willing to move on things where there's bipartisan consensus. Last example I'll give you. You know, after after Trump had been elected, named the next president, wasn't sworn in yet, I've been working on a thing called a bill relating to cancer cures. Okay, and it was called the Cancer Moonshot.
You need to be able to work with someone
Democrats and Republicans
across the aisle on singular issues
that made significant
that are very
increases in
specific
research and development on cancer alternatives, NIH, and particularly specific cancer initiatives. And we only had at the time, I think it was 111 or 114, whatever it was, votes in the House. I don't hold me the exact number, and we had fewer than 40 in the Senate. But after he was elected, I got those people together as vice president, and we sat down and we worked it out. And we ended up getting it passed 396 votes in the House and 94 votes in the Senate. And at the end of the day, because it had to do with the Biden cancer moonshot I've been working on, Mitch McConnell stood up, and I was presiding officer, and moved to name the bill after my deceased son, Bo, who had just died. So there are ways to bring this together.
But how about the question of political accountability? Is there some tension between that and bringing people together? You know, Robert Mueller laid out a lot of evidence of possible obstruction of justice by President Trump. What would a Biden Justice Department do with that evidence?
What the Biden Justice Department will do is let the Department of Justice be the Department of Justice. Let them make the judgments of who should be prosecuted. They are not my lawyers. They're not my personal lawyers.
So you're not going to rule it in or rule it out?
I'm not going to rule in or out. I'm going to hire really first-rate prosecutors and people who understand the law, like Democrat and Republican administrations have had, and let them make the judgments. But turning this into a vehicle for as if it's your own law firm, you don't own that Justice Department. You pick the best people you can, and you hope that what they're going to do is they're going to enforce the law as they see it. But can you remember any Republican president going out there, or former Democratic president, go find that guy and prosecute him? Ever hear that? Or, by the way, I'm being sued because a woman's accused me of rape. Represent me. Represent me. Personally represent me in the state of New York on my not allowing my tax returns. What's that all about? What is that about?
He's got a good point.
We'll be right back.
Got a good point. He's doing a really good job in this. He's doing a really good job in this town hall of really setting up his positions, not necessarily even explicitly naming Trump while he's giving these discussions and talks, but setting up positions that run clearly counter to Trump and allow others to kind of connect the dots on their own, you know. He's saying without saying, and that's pretty good. However, I will say that, like, they're again, much like in the previous town hall and also in the debate, he is at so many different turns kind of handicapped by his own policies. He is kept down by the weakness of neoliberalism, or like the need to portray his political enemies as like good and reasonable people, when in fact they're not. For the vast majority of conservatives in the government right now, who are enabling and going along with Trump, who is an outright fascist, they have capitulated to fascism. These are not people that you can say, yeah, they're fundamentally good people, and we'll work with them on these wide range of issues. No, if you're going to work with them at all, you need to pick and choose very specific issues that have very specific goals and are very clearly defined. Otherwise, they can be misused for all kinds of things, or like the kind of thing where like a fascist will be like, yeah, we need to invest in infrastructure. I agree with you. But when the fascist says that, they mean infrastructure for, white people and their political allies. At the expense of their political enemies, right? Whereas typically when Democrats are talking about spending on infrastructure, they're talking about spending it on everybody. But a fascist will be like, yeah, we can actually spend less on infrastructure, you know? I have a secret plan. So that's what we need to be careful of, and I think neoliberalism in particular is very weak to that sort of fascist approach. So, again, Biden's doing very well, but he could be doing a lot better if he had better policies.
And welcome back to our town hall with former Vice President Joe Biden. We're going to look at the environment right now. We're going to get a question from Michelle Elisen from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a businesswoman, a social worker. You're a Republican who's voted for Democrats, but you're not sure what you're going to do this time around. Correct?
Correct.
Oh yeah, Mitch McConnell's a piece of shit.
Greetings, former Vice President Biden.
Hello.
Thank you, Mrs. Dollars. In a 2012 report of the University of Pittsburgh's Institute of Politics, fracking was discussed and its possible implications for the waterways from the Commonwealth to the Gulf. Fracking has made the population sick and killed wildlife in southwest Pennsylvania. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and small business development centers have already begun to transition people away from fossil fuels. What industries that are not harmful to human health and the environment are you planning for Southwest Pennsylvania and the nation?
Well, first of all, I make it clear I do not propose banning fracking. I think you have to make sure that fracking is in fact not emitting methane or polluting the well or dealing with what can be small earthquakes and how they're drilling. So it has to be managed very, very well, number one. Number two, what we have to do is the future rests in renewable energy. The single fastest growing energy source in the world right now, because I'm going to say something that's going to sound self-serving, but I managed the Recovery Act, and I was able to invest billions of dollars into bringing down the cost per BTU of wind and solar. So now it's cheaper than coal, it's cheaper than oil right now. And it has great, great promise. And it's also the fastest growing employer in the energy industry. And so there are a number of things that I would do immediately. Number one, there are well over 100,000 wells that are left uncapped in the region. We could hire 128,000 of these people who are working in the industry to cap these wells and get a good salary doing it now. Number one. Number two, we should be moving toward finding the new technologies that are going to be able to deal with carbon capture. So ultimately, as a transition, we moved to a net zero emission of carbon, that we're still going to be able to use, if we find the right technology, some gas to be able to, if we can carbon capture. And I think we're going to be able to move in a direction where by the year 2035, we'll be able to have net zero emissions of carbon from the creation of energy creation. So we can move it by dealing with those. And every time we talk about global warming or the environment, the president thinks it's a joke, and I think it's jobs. Because what we're going to have happen is, you'll be able to see now, as I started to say before, I, as president, is going to invest that $600 billion we spend in government contracts only on those things that, in fact, also are not only made in America, but building an infrastructure that's clean and new. And what we have to do is focus on the transmission of energy across the country from areas relating to solar and wind. The reason is that that has not been mastered yet. I met a lot of people in Silicon Valley. The battery technology is increasing significantly, so you're going to be able to have, for example, solar on your home and a battery the size this by this, as I'm showing you here, in your basement. So when the sun doesn't shine for 5 days, you still have enough energy. So we're making significant progress. The other thing we're going to do is provide an awful lot of work. It's estimated to put close to 1 million people to work by weatherizing 4 million buildings and 2 million homes. because we'll save tons and tons of energy, or like billions of barrels of energy over time, and at the same time provide significant employment and a good union wages, prevailing wages.
Let me stick on fracking for a second. You said you don't want to ban fracking. As you know, it's an important issue here in Pennsylvania. Not everyone buys your denial. A member of the Boilermakers Local 154, Sean Stephanie, was quoted in the New York Times today saying, "You can't have it both ways." He says you can't meet your goal to end fossil fuels without ending fracking. What do you say to people like Sean who doubt your denial because they think you want to keep that promise?
Tell them the Boilermakers overwhelmingly endorse me, okay? So the Boilermakers unions endorsed me because I sat down with them in great detail with the leadership exactly what I would do, number one. Number two, what I would do is I would stop giving tax breaks and subsidizing oil. We don't need to subsidize oil any longer, number one. We should stop that and save billions of dollars over time. What I would also do with regard to, the difference between me and the new Green Deal, they say automatically by 2030, we're going to be carbon free. Not possible.
So are you for it or against it? You say you're not for it, but in your website it says you call it a crucial framework. The Green New Deal.
My deal is a crucial framework, but not the new Green Deal. The new Green Deal calls for elimination of all non-renewable energy by 2030. You can't get there. You're going to need to be able to transition, George, to be able to transition to get to the place where we invest in new technologies that allow us to do things that get us to a place where we get to net zero emission, including in agriculture. I've laid out a detailed plan. We should be taking the plan where we allow significant more land to be put in conservation, plant deep-rooted plants which absorb carbon from the air, and in fact pay farmers to do it. We can do things like pelletize all the chicken manure and all the horse manure and cow manure, and they can take out the methane and use it as fertilizer and make a lot of money doing it. For example, right now down in people, when I say that, they wonder what I'm talking about. The biggest carbon sink in the world is the Amazon. More carbon absorbed from the air, diminishing global warming, in the Amazon than all the carbon emitted on a yearly basis from the United States of America, from all vehicles and all means. So we have to use our imaginations. We have to move in the direction as well, providing for electric vehicles. Electric vehicles will save billions of gallons of oil, create, estimated, not me, Wall Street, 1 million automobile jobs. But we're lagging, we're not investing. We're not doing any of the research.
Got to take another quick break. We'll be right back.
ABC News, straightforward. It's being called the most consequential election of a lifetime, the most important vote, and with so much on the line, it demands the most straightforward, news-making, real answers, the most informed voices from all sides. The countdown is on to the vote. What will our future look like? ABC's This Week with George. It all plays out right here every Sunday.
The most consequential week yet of this hyper-political year.
Right as you get closer to casting your vote every Sunday on ABC.
What is necessary for Chicago is a vision, actual solutions for the issues we face.
Move away. All people, all voices.
One Chicago, united for all.
Welcome to Disney Plus. Are you ready? Drop in and explore. The action, the adventure, and the originals. There's no limit to what you'll find. These are your worlds. So come on, dive deeper into the universes you love. Wherever and whenever you want them, you'll find them all here on Disney Plus.
Hello? This is Montana Highway Patrol. You're looking for a couple of missing teenagers.
That's right. Last seen in a red Focus.
The steering wheel is getting stiff. Lock the door. We're fine.
Got ourselves a predicament.
This
This is what being live is all about. This is ABC News Live, the 24/7 streaming news source, ABC News. Wow. Breaking news, live events as they happen, streaming live, non-stop, straight to you. Original, on the edge, breakthrough storytelling. From ABC News, National Geographic, ESPN, all designed differently for you to stream straight to any screen whenever you want, free. And imagine the most celebrated, epic live events and moments, all playing out right before your eyes.
See those flames behind me?
And go deeper inside the groundbreaking exclusives from the campaign trail only ABC News gets. Watch ABC News Live right now and anytime. Streaming on Roku, Hulu, Facebook, and abcnews.com.
ABC News Live.
Streaming everywhere, right to you.
ABC News Live.
Now could be a good time to have another baby.
Are you crazy? I'm in love with you. Now that I said it out loud, it does sound weird. Please stop.
You were so fine, I had to remind myself to breathe.
Let's do this.
How's your quarantine going?
Now, when it matters most, the straightforward facts. ABC News is America's #1 news. #1 in the morning, #1 in the evening, and the #1 show on all of television. #1 in late night versus the competition. #1 in politics versus the competition. The #1 daytime talk show. And #1 in streaming news. Most trusted, most watched. ABC News is America's #1 news.
Admit it, these days, what you need to know seems to change, well, every day.
So what can help you feel smarter, better, happier?
This is GMA3, what you need to know.
Lunchtime at 1 Eastern, 12 Central and Pacific on ABC.
Who was John Lennon?
Magical, brilliant, daring. John was my favorite Beatle.
Now, new interviews with those who were right there with John Lennon and his last interview, all on that day.
Wow, there's life, there's hope.
The 2020 event, John Lennon, Friday night on ABC.
Welcome back to our town hall with former Vice President Joe Biden. The next question comes from Mark Hoffman, Center Valley, Pennsylvania, conservative who voted for Trump in 2016.
Welcome to Pennsylvania, Mr. Vice President.
Good to be back home. I'm from Pennsylvania.
Yes, I know. Scranton, right?
Yep.
So, peace is breaking out all over the world. Our troops are coming home. Serbia is talking to Kosovo. And the Arabs and Israelis are talking peace, which I believe is a modern-day miracle, what's going on. Does President Trump's foreign policy deserve some credit?
A little, but not a whole lot. We find ourselves in a position where we're
I think he just said that he
in the world
believes
than
that
we've
the
ever been.
Middle
Our
East is at
allies
peace
are,
right now, which is not the
our
case.
goal alone, America first has made America alone. You have Iran closer to having enough nuclear material to build a bomb. North Korea has more bombs and missiles available to it. We find ourselves where our NATO allies are publicly saying they can't count on us. We're in a situation as well where in the Far East we find ourselves in the Western Pacific where we're isolated as well. You have Japan and South Korea at odds with one another. China is making moves. So I would say we find ourselves less secure than we've been. I do compliment the president on the deal with
hello,
with
Jose
Israel
Scranton.
recently. If you take a look, we're not very well trusted around the world. When 17 major nations in the world were asked who they trust more, who's the better leader, and the president came in behind both the international survey, both behind Putin as well as Xi. And look what Putin's doing. You know, you have Americans, bounties on American military's heads in Afghanistan. There have more people there now, by the way, than when we left in Afghanistan. And we find ourselves in a situation where he's talked to Putin 6 times, hadn't said a word to him. And NATO is on the risk of beginning to crack because they don't
We're all
doubt,
comrades
they doubt
here,
our
Jose.
consent, whether we're there. You see what's happening in everything from Belarus to Poland to Hungary, and the rise of totalitarian regimes in the world, and as well as this president embraces all the thugs in the world. I mean, he's best friends with the leader of North Korea, sending love letters. He doesn't take on Putin in any way, and he is just he's learned the art of the steal from the art of the deal by Xi in China. So I would respectfully suggest, no, there is no plan, no coherent plan for foreign policy. You know, we've always ruled. We've been most effective as a world leader, in my humble opinion, not just by the exercise of our power, we're the most powerful nation in the world, but the power of our example. That's what's led the rest
Joe
of
was
the world
talking
to
about
follow
Russia.
us on almost
Yeah.
everything. He's pulled out of almost every international
China,
organization. He gets laughed at when he goes to the, literally, not figuratively, when he goes to the United Nations.
Xi Jinping is the,
it's just
the leader
not-
of China.
It's not about the president per se, it's about the nation and the lack of respect that's shown to us.
I want to get one more question in this segment, and it comes from Mika Hack. She's from State College, Pennsylvania.
I
This
wonder
is
if
your
that
first
guy was
presidential election
just
that
had
you're
the
voting.
impression
Hi, Mika,
that
how are you?
we have peace in the Middle
I'm
East
good,
because
thank
of he's a Zionist.
I'm the proud mom of 2 girls, 8 and 10.
Good job.
My youngest daughter is transgender.
Nice.
The Trump administration has attacked the rights of transgender people.
True.
Banning them from military service, weakening non-discrimination protections, and
Slavery
even
seems really
removing
cool.
the word transgender from some government websites. How will you, as president, reverse this dangerous and discriminatory agenda
Please
and
tell
ensure
us.
that the lives and rights of LGBTQ people are protected under U.S. law?
I will flat out just change the law. Eliminate those executive orders, number one.
Hell yeah.
You may recall, I'm the guy who said, I was raised by a man who, I remember I was being dropped off. My dad was a high school educated, well-read
She seems like a
man
good
who,
mom.
Was a really decent guy, and I was being dropped off to get an application in the center of our city, Wilmington, Delaware, the corporate capital of the world at the time. And these 2 men, I'm getting out to get an application to be a lifeguard in the African-American community because there was a big swimming pool complex.
Oh, is this the corn pop story?
And these 2 men, well-dressed, leaned up and hugged one another and kissed one another. And I'm getting out of the car at the light, and I turned to my dad. My dad looked at me and said, Joey, it's simple. They love each other. The idea that an 8-year-old child or a 10-year-old child decides, you know, I decided I want to be transgender. That's what I think I'd like to be. It'll make my life a lot easier. There should be zero discrimination. And what's happening is too many transgender women of color are being murdered.
True.
They're being murdered. I mean, I think it's up to now 17. Don't hold me to that number, but it's higher now.
Yeah.
And
Oh, man,
just
she's
as
so
here-
based.
and
She even knows.
I promise you, there is no reason to suggest that there should be any right denied your daughter or daughters, whichever, if one or two, your daughter, that your other daughter has a right to be and do. None, zero. And by the way, my son Bo passed away, was the Attorney General of the state of Delaware. He was the guy who got the first transgender law passed in the state of Delaware, and because of a young man who became a woman who worked for him.
Look, guys, he's not going to have the best vocabulary, okay?
Got
He's
one
not
more
going to
second
have
coming
the
up.
on-point
Thank you.
vocab. He's like 100 years old, okay? As far as it goes from someone of Joe Biden's generation, that is one of the best answers we could have possibly hoped for when it comes to trans rights, okay? Yeah, exactly. Cut before he fucks up. Yeah, he's trying. Yeah, that was a really good answer. Also, sorry I had to step away from the stream for a little bit. I ate right before we started, and I don't have a gallbladder. I had to have that removed last year, so basically, sometimes when I eat something, my system just like rejects it and I need a bathroom like ASAP.
Good morning, America.
But yeah, no, Joe Biden, I don't think on like a personal level he's a bad dude. He's just of his generation, and he's passed a lot of not great policies, and he's the kind of guy who thinks that capitalism works, and it doesn't. Kids can't think right? It's the low? Well, boss, we went over this the other day. We went over this about trans kids, actually. Giving trans kids access to things like hormone or puberty blockers actually lowers their suicidality. And at virtually no actual impact to their development if they decide later that they are not trans. But also, kids have to consent for a wide variety of other medical procedures all the time. Like, parents can't force their kid against their will to have surgeries, you know, there is still bodily autonomy for children. Children do have the right to refuse treatment of certain kinds. So, like, yeah.
Liverpool.
Good evening. You say that you committed to entering this race after the events of Charlottesville in 2017. I assume that that feeling that prompted you to run will not go away once the results are determined. So, hypothetically, if you lose, how will you use your platform to urge President Donald Trump and those rallying behind him towards the ideals of a more perfect union?
Well, to be very honest with you, I think that's very hard. He is not, things have not lent themselves to him.
Because he's a fascist.
What's happened, what's gone before. Instead of being chastened by being one of the few presidents, the only president to be impeached and then have a member of his own party vote to expel him, it emboldened him. So, but what I will do, hopefully I'll go back to being a professor at the University of Pennsylvania and making the case that I've been made and at the Biden Institute at the University of Delaware, focusing on these same issues relating to what constitutes decency and honor in this country. It's the thing that got me involved in public life to begin with. As a kid, I moved from Scranton, where there were no African Americans, and moved down to Claymont, Delaware, and in Delaware we have the 8th largest black population as a percent of population. It was an epiphany for me, seeing what was going on, and I got deeply involved. I'm no great shakes. I don't mean I wasn't John Lewis. I don't mean to imply that, but it's the thing that's motivated. My dad used to have an expression, for real. He said, everyone's entitled to be treated with dignity. Everybody. And it was real. Everybody is. And so whether I'm a defeated candidate for president back teaching or I'm elected president, it is a major element of everything that I'm about because it reflects who we are as a nation. And it's what makes us, this is every single solitary generation. The dial has moved closer and closer and more to inclusion. And we are a country that is a country of slaves who came here 400 years ago, indigenous people, and everyone else is an immigrant. And we're a diverse country. And unless we are able to treat people equally, we're just never going to meet our potential. But I think the American people want to see that happen. I think they're ready to see it happen. And I tell you one thing, if I'm elected president, you will not hear me race baiting, you'll not hear me dividing, you'll hear me trying to unify. And unify with, bring people together. When I said I was running because I wanted to unify the country, people said, well, they were the old days. We better be able to do it again.
Agreed.
We better be able to do it again.
Mr. Vice President, if you lose, what will that say to you about where America is today?
Well, it could say that I'm a lousy candidate and I didn't do a good job. But I think, I hope that it doesn't say that we are as racially, ethnically, and religiously at odds with one another as it appears the president wants us to be. Usually, you know, the president's, in my view, with all due respect, has been divide and conquer. The way he does better if he splits us. There's division.
As fascists
I think people need
do.
hope. I think, look, George, I've never been more optimistic about the prospects for this country than I am today, and I really mean that. I think the people are ready, they understand what's at stake, and it's not about Democrat or Republican. If I get elected, you know, I'm running as a proud Democrat, but I'm going to be an American president. I'm going to take care of those who voted against me as well as those who voted for me, for real. That's what presidents do. We got to heal this nation because we have the greatest opportunity of any country in the world to own the 21st century, and we can't do it divided.
One more break. We'll be right back.
You know what? Everything he said there is 100% correct. And it's correct both if you are a neo-lib like Joe Biden, and it's also correct if you are a socialist like myself. And I assume several of you out there. Because at the end of the day, we do need to bring people together in some kind of a coalition. Like, it's not like we are going to be able to get everyone to agree on socialist policy. And that's why when I do a lot of my advocacy, I am telling people that, you know, it's based on facts, you know. Part of the reason that I advocate, for example, for worker co-ops is because it's a lot easier for people to imagine worker co-ops than it is, for example, like the government, like coming in and taking a company away from like the private owners. It's a lot more palatable for people if they are, you know, if it is a slow and gradual process towards that better future, you know. More people can get behind that sort of a slow transition than are, you know, ready to take up arms right now and like build the guillotines and like go for a bloody revolution, right? And it's far more ideal to, in my mind, to go for a peaceful revolution. For example, you know, in the history of the world, there have been a whole lot of bloody revolutions to create democracies. But you know what was one of the most successful revolutions of all time? It's called the Glorious Revolution, and it happened in England, when the monarchy gave up power to the people, and it became a parliamentary democracy. So, like, there are better ways to do things, there are good ways to do things, but the best way for us to go about our mission to make a better world is to build a unified front. Because there are a lot more workers in this country than there are terrified white fascists. And that's the truth. We will always be the majority, because we're on the side of working people, and for the most part, working people are on our side. They just don't know it yet, in a large number of cases. So we just need to get our message out there, we need to talk with people, and we need to explain what has for so long been fear-mongered against. Is not actually something to be feared, but it's actually something to be embraced and even preferred over what we have now. For example, I think it would take a lot of anxiety off of people's shoulders right now, where, like, something around half of all renters aren't going to be able to make their rent. And I think that number skyrockets to like 60 or 70% by the end of the year. I think there'd be a whole lot less pressure on those people if they knew that if they didn't make their rent, if they got kicked out of their place of, you know, their home, that they could move into a place where there wasn't rent. I think a socialist society where there was a certain level of decommodification for these things would be a much better society, a much happier society, and a much more evidently good society than what we have now. No, Jose of Scranton, I'm not taking the tanky route. I think tankies are, to be 100% frank with you, quite silly. Indeed, there is room for everything, everyone. And honestly, the strength of fascism runs counter to the strength of socialism. You know, fascism's strength comes from separating people and collecting a weak base of support, and then individually picking off the others that are separate from one another by religion or politics or race.
A week from tonight. Just two quick questions. Do you expect that debate to happen? Will you demand that President Trump take a test that day and that it be negative before you debate?
Yeah, by the way, before I came up here, I took another test. I've been taking every day, the deep test, you know, the one they go in both. And because I wanted to be able, if I had not passed that test, I didn't want to come here and not, you know, expose anybody. And I just think it's just decency to be able to determine whether or not you are you're clear. And it's not. I'm less concerned about me, but then the people, the guys at the cameras, the people working in a, you know, the Secret Service guys you drive up with, all those people. And so yes, I believe he'll do that. Look, I'm going to abide by what the commission rules call for. I was prepared to debate him remotely, which was supposed to happen, and he said he wouldn't do that.
Jose of Scranton, I don't think it's necessarily worth it to try and turn fascists into non-fascists. I think once they're that far gone, they're going to be much harder to reach. They can change over time. I'm not saying they can't, but I think for my part, as somebody who's trying to build a platform, I'd be much better served reaching out to average conservatives who haven't yet gone all the way fascist, and reaching out to like neoliberals and liberals to try and bring them over to my side. Oh, okay. It was basically over already. All right.
Of course, voting already underway. More than 18 million Americans have.
So, I feel like that was a really productive town hall. I think that Joe Biden got across a lot of his points. It was a little bit rocky for him there, especially when he was talking about race issues. Because I do not think that he has necessarily the record that backs up a lot of those things. I think there are a lot of things in his record that make him look pretty not great, to be 100% honest. But overall, I think he comes off looking very reasonable, exceedingly decent, and you know, ready to stand as basically something in opposition to the Trump presidency. And yes, we will be getting to the Trump town hall in just a bit, but I wanted to give like a little bit of a breakdown for the Biden town hall. Now I'm not sure what I missed in the middle there, but it's the kind of thing where I think that this is going to reach, as much as this doesn't necessarily speak to me, like a lot of the things he was talking about were not particularly interesting to me, like especially like the tax rate stuff. And that maybe that's just because I'm, you know, even though I'm up here talking to all of you, I'm not like a super genius or anything, right? I have a decent grasp of rhetoric. I have a decent grasp of politics. But you know, I am of the camp that like everyone should be able to you know, grasp these things to a similar degree that I have. And I think for a lot of people, when the tax information starts getting discussed, their eyes glaze over because they know that, like, you know, it's not a particularly interesting topic, because for a lot of people, tax cuts just mean, you know, maybe $100 extra bucks. And for the people at the very bottom, like, that might not even be something that they get, right? So I don't really pay much attention to that in practice. Like, you know, I might go read up on it later. But I do think that when he was going into detail about what he would like to do for the Black community, for example, like his plan as it comes to Black communities in the United States, I think that was very good, especially because he doesn't have a great record on African American issues. And basically, anytime he was able to bring up Trump in this debate, he looked way better than anything Trump has put together. Like, Trump on foreign policy is incredibly terrible. Like, he tried to, he shook down NATO. And NATO, for those of you who don't know, is like our coalition of European allies. And basically, he threatened to pull out of NATO if they didn't start paying more money. And they did, but that grievously hurt our international relations in Europe. Pulling out of the Iranian nuclear deal, for example, now there's a huge problem, you know, a couple years later, of Iran being on the cusp of being able to build a nuke. And that was the entire point of the Iran nuclear deal, was that it was kicking the ball 10 years down the road. So they wouldn't have any fissionable material until like a decade had passed, and we could deal with it, you know, in 2024. And they would be starting from nothing. Instead, we're going to have to deal with it in 2020, and they're going to be on the cusp of building a bomb. So like, the idea that we're in a better state of foreign relations now. Oh, and North Korea has several operational nuclear warheads. So like, we're in a much worse place on an international stage, even when we talk about the things that people tout Trump for doing well. Like, yeah, he got us more money from NATO, and yeah, he improved relations with North Korea. Like, yeah, he improved relations specifically with the leader of North Korea, who used those good relations to buy him buffer and time to build more bombs. So like, good on us, I guess. Yeah, it's just, and also that's not even to mention like the degradation of relationships between us and China. You know, starting a giant trade war, which, by the way, we lost. We spent way more money to boost our own industries than they did. And now we have farmers receiving tens of billions of dollars in grants just to keep them afloat. So, like, yeah, that's not great. Not great. Not ideal. So it's... We're in a tough situation right now. And Biden really only has to be like, yeah, I was vice president for 8 years. I know all of these people. And also, like, Trump has screwed up everything. And by the way, Trump still has open diplomat positions all across the world. Like, if you do you remember that when he came into office, there was a news story, and it was relatively big at the time, but it like immediately faded into obscurity, where he fired and recalled all of the diplomats, like, from around the world, and he has only replaced like a select number of them. So like, our diplomatic corps right now is extremely not effective. So yeah, stuff like that, it's still in effect. No, I didn't see Obama asking people not to bully old shoe leather. But yeah, I think overall, anytime that Biden was able to hit on these differences and basically just make the appeal of, I am reasonable and calm and decent, and my opponent is just a massive fuck up. I think anytime he was able to do that, he came off looking really good, which incidentally was most of this town hall. So yeah, I think this went really well for him optics-wise. Maybe not so well in terms of getting his actual policy positions out there, but I think he did do his best. True, Trump doesn't care about diplomacy, except insofar as it can be used to enrich himself. For example, do you guys remember relatively recently, there was a delegation from Turkey that was going to come and stay in the Trump Hotel in Washington, D.C., and then Trump refused to meet like one of their demands. I'm remembering this off the top of my head, so I don't remember exactly what happened. But they recalled the delegation and refused to stay in the Trump hotel. So Trump then almost immediately capitulated to their demand on international policy. And they then sent their delegation there to spend obnoxious amounts of money in his actual hotel. And I think they worked it out. The press worked it out, and it was something along the lines of like $5 to $10 million at his establishment. So like Trump only cares about diplomacy insofar as he can shake down other people for money to his failing business empire and funnel that money into his currently massively in debt pockets. Or for example, he holds like these international Trump pageants, and he holds one in Russia every year, and it's actually lost hundreds of thousands of dollars every year until the one that they recently held in Russia, and that one somehow made several $1,000,000 due to the sudden investment of a Russian oligarch. So like there are all of these. Hunter Biden didn't make billions of dollars from China and Russia, boss. You think that Hunter Biden is a fucking billionaire? You like live in this other world where you're just getting your data from absolute lunatics, okay? Biden did look a little bit sleepy towards the end there, but I think overall he was pretty awake. But yeah, I mean, obviously Biden might have gotten some money from like working as like for Burisma, but also, do you know how often people get kicked, like the kids of rich people get hired to do things they're not qualified for? It's like all the fucking time. Like, what you think Ivanka Trump is qualified to be working in the White House? You think Jared is qualified to be working in the White House? Like, how many of Trump's fucking kids are working in the White House, and like in-laws and like relatives? It's so many, and they're all pulling government paychecks, and they're all getting government grants, and they're all using their sways to like, I think Ivanka got something like 23 different patents passed in China for Trump products. So like, yeah, all rich people are in on this grift of being put in positions that they're not qualified for, which is part of the reason that I'm against capitalism. Okay? Like, that's just the game that we're a part of. And I disagree with it, and I would like to change it, but it's not necessarily the fault, like some grand scheme to get Hunter Biden rich. This is just what happens with rich people's kids. Yeah, they fucking sold Goya beans at the White House. Like, I think also I don't think Boss is a troll. I think Boss is just a conservative who's getting their information from very dubious sources. Okay, and I'm not willing to like completely dunk on people like that. I would just encourage you, Boss, to like find more reputable sources and look outside where you're getting your information from, because it's not really based in reality. Okay, it's based in like this conspiracy-laden QAnon reality that has been built up by the right. And on that note, oh dang, nice, Jose of Scranton. We have a couple of Puerto Rican members in the chat. I don't know if they're here right now, but yeah, they're out there. They make appearances.